One bone of contention at the talks is Canada's system of managed dairy production and fixed prices. The U.S. would like to export more of its dairy product to Canada. That's why we're hearing more about supply management in recent days from farmers and politicians.
Enough is enough. When will the Prime Minister do as he promised and commit to fully protect supply management?
There's more at stake than just the dairy industry. It affects all of us. So I came here today to not just defend me, but defend every Canadian for the right to produce our own product.
This House urges the government to put the complete abolition of the system of supply management on the negotiating table.
Canada has taken advantage of our country for a long time. They cannot continue to charge us 300% tariff on dairy products.
Bruce Muirhead is a foreign trade policy expert. He's a professor at the University of Waterloo and joins me now. So, Bruce, we just heard the U.S. president. He's repeatedly said that Canada's dairy system is hurting U.S. farmers, that we cannot continue to charge 300% on some dairy products from the U.S. Is that a fair depiction?
I don't think so. In fact, we're not part of the problem. We're part of the solution. He wants to exploit Canada's dairy market largely because American dairy producers are producing far too much milk for their market and for whatever export market share they might have in foreign places. They see Canada as probably the last best, fairly wealthy, quite dynamic society that they can send their fluid milk to, which is the big moneymaker for dairy farmers. They can truck it over the border. Milk is a highly perishable product, so they can truck it over the border. It's the same as shipping it from upstate New York to New York City. They could ship it from upstate New York or Wisconsin into parts of Ontario or Manitoba very, very easily. That's why they want the market. We are not part of the problem. Also, we won't be part of their solution, at least the president thinks we will be, largely because we're too small. The state of Wisconsin alone produces more milk than all of Canada, and that's because when I've said we weren't part of the problem, we're part of the solution. We have production controls in place, which means we do not contribute to the global excess of dairy that's washing around the world like a tsunami. The Americans are huge contributors to that tsunami of milk that washes around the world. We are not.
Why is that? How does the U.S. dairy industry work and compare it to our system in Canada? Why is Wisconsin producing so much?
Well, we have supply management, as I think your leader suggested from the House of Commons. And supply management is based upon 3 pillars. One of those pillars is production control, basically based on quotas. Quotas are expressed in kilograms of milk solid in Canada, and the average farm in Canada has about 80 kilograms of milk solid. That's about 80 to 85 milking cows. We supply the entire Canadian market with an average per farm of about 85 kilograms, 80 to 85 kilograms of milk solid per cow, per farm. So it's a very efficient system. We don't produce too much for the Canadian market. We produce just enough, in fact, and the Dairy Farmers of Canada, the Dairy Commission in Canada, and various other agencies have worked at this since 1966. They're experts at calculating demand in the year coming up, and it works very, very well. We don't export, by and large, to the U.S. In fact, the U.S. right now has about a $480 million dairy surplus with us. That is, they export $480 million more dairy product to Canada than we export to them. We export a very, very small amount. So we have production controls in place, which means we don't contribute, as I said, to this global excess of milk that's washing around the world. The United States does significantly contribute to that global excess.
Why?
They don't have production controls.
So, and they subsidize the industry? Is that why they produce so much? Like, what's going on? I'm trying to get at whether or not Donald Trump is right in saying that it's unfair that we impose this tariff. I mean, are they, in indirect ways, also protecting their industry?
They protect their market vigorously. In fact, they protect their market to a much greater extent than we protect ours. About 10% of the Canadian market, dairy market, is open for foreign imports, through the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, through the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the renamed TPP. The Americans have about 2% of their dairy market open. They have all sorts of controls in place to discourage foreign dairy imports into the United States. They don't want their dairy farmers to be competing with foreigners who might produce dairy a little bit more cheaply than they might in the form of yogurt or skim milk powder or whole milk powder. So they are very, very restrictive. They don't necessarily use tariffs, but they use other mechanisms to keep our milk out of their, well, not our milk, to keep foreigners' milk out of their market. The National Milk Producers Federation in the United States as well, which is their lobby group, the organization that oversees a lot of dairy production, is a very, very influential agency in the United States. They have the ear of Congress, and clearly they have the ear of the president as well. So they make sure that their views are heard. And dairy products in the U.S. are, you know, I mean, in terms of Canada-U.S. trade, it's basically like 0.1%. You know, it's virtually nothing. And yet here we have a president spending his valuable time criticizing a system that doesn't adversely affect American dairy production, to the extent that he's now talking about perhaps not signing off on NAFTA unless they get some sort of dairy agreement, which is virtually nothing in the big scheme of things.
Bruce, thank you. That is
So,
Bruce. Yeah, go ahead. One last thought. Yeah.
Sure, they're highly protectionist. They subsidize their dairy product as well. As you may know, with the latest tariffs against China and China's retaliation against the United States, Trump allocated some billions of dollars towards helping farmers see their way forward. Dairy got about $300 to $400 million of that, the subsidy arrangement that was passed by the U.S. government. So whenever things get tough, they do resort to subsidies. And I have to say, an American farmer never met a subsidy they didn't like.
Bruce, thank you. Bruce Muirhead from the University of Waterloo.